The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Gwilda Wiyaka's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the Science of Magic or endorsed in any manner by Gwilda Wiyaka, Relmar McConnell Media Company, its affiliated networks, stations, or employees. Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Welcome to the Science of Magic, a place where science and magic come together to transform fact into evolving truth. We're proudly coming to you through the ever-expanding X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net, and can also be found on our website, thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour we'll be exploring bards and poets. Across the ages, societies, and realities, shamans have been artisans, bards, and poets. All shamanic traditions have stories, rhythms, and songs that have been passed down for generations. Information from modern-day shamanic journey trance is most often presented in allegorical form, allowing meaning to deepen and transform as our understanding and openness evolves. Even Jesus, who I'm considered to be the greatest shaman to ever live, taught in parables. In my early studies, I used to wonder, why don't they just say what they mean? Why all the theatrics and drama? Imagine my surprise when years later, I found my teaching style embracing story, song, and allegory in abundance. I discovered there's no way to just say it. Every word and concept is heard in a different way by every individual in the room, often resulting in distortion, falsehood, and misunderstanding. But a story can meet each person no matter the age or level of understanding. It can do this without imposing meaning beyond what can be comprehended or accepted in the moment. A story doesn't impose dubious facts and concepts, but rather lures the listener into deeper understanding by transcending the mind and engaging the imagination. We can only understand information according to the frequency we carry. When we live in an artificial world of chaos, noise, and hype, our frequency is dictated by the environment. If, however, we expose ourselves to sacred stories, music, and song composed and performed from the heart, our frequency rises, understanding deepens, and we evolve. I'm a teacher of the shamanic arts. Every one of my classes is a ceremony which includes rhythm, song, and story. All of the students participate in drumming and singing as we open and close each class. This practice creates sacred space, which is a high-frequency environment. When cloistered in sacred space, our frequency rises, and with it, our level of understanding, allowing much deeper sharing and absorption of esoteric information. If you're hearing my voice right now, you are in sacred space, as I use the same principles when creating every episode of The Science of Magic. With the agreement and enfoldment of my producer and generous participation of my guest, sacred space is created and held for our listeners. From this sanctuary, we can share deeply and profoundly, heart to heart. These tools are available to anyone if we but take the time to learn and embrace them. I would invite you to take a deep breath and turn inward. Listen with your heart. How do you feel? Can you relax into the moment? Can you really hear me? From out of this moment, you have the way to become more, do more, love more. It's all within you. Out of this moment, you have the opportunity to choose your next thoughts and actions, empowered by your own bard's heart and poetic soul. You have the means to not only transform your life, but the world around you. Our guest this hour is Jeff Stockton, a shamanic teacher in the Celtic tradition. His studies and training in shamanism began on the strings of a Celtic harp. Working with the wisdom of story and song, Jeff endeavors to nourish the spirit in all manner of realms. He's worked in professional development environments, conferences, and retreat settings, seamlessly blending the wisdom of the past with the realities of the present. Having trained extensively in Celtic and core shamanism, he teaches workshops in shamanism and has been invited to present at national and international shamanic conferences. Jeff has ongoing shamanic series of workshops. After this commercial break, I'll introduce Jeff, and together we'll enter the magical Celtic land of shamanism, story, and song. So don't go away. You're listening to The Science of Magic. Prior innovative episodes can always be found on our website, thescienceofmagic.net. The Science of Magic is produced by Relmar McConnell Media Company, Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Though the world seems in turmoil around us, let's not lose our way. The stars still shine down, blessing us with their light. The sun rises every morning, chasing away the cold and darkness. There are good people of service in this world. We have much to be grateful for as we're wrapped in the arms of all of God's creation. This is Gwilda Wiyaka, host of the Science of Magic Radio, wishing you and yours a very Merry Christmas. I hope your holiday is filled with comfort and joy as you're surrounded by those you love. I'd like to thank all of you for being our loyal listeners on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and for joining us on this grand adventure called life. As the New Year's dawns, let us all stand in truth as we embrace peace. Welcome back. This is the Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Celtic shamanic teacher, Celtic harpist and singer and storyteller, Jeff Stockton. Jeff weaves magic as a Celtic harpist and singer and storyteller and has performed nationally and internationally. An award-winning recording artist, he's released 4 recordings of his work in song and story: Sacred Ground, Beneath the Boughs, Wisdom of the Woods, and Between Two Lights. Jeff's website is jeffstockton.ca. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on The Science of Magic.
Well, Gwilda, what a gift to be joining you today. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, that was your music introducing. Which album is that one off of?
That one is from Between Two Lights. It's a beautiful song that was one that came in the winter months, a song to Ankailiak, the old woman of winter.
Nice. I find it very intriguing that your training in shamanism began on the strings of the Celtic harp. Would you explain that to us?
Well, I wonder sometimes if it began there or if it simply came into being there. I think it was a threshold that I crossed. I believe that for anyone called to come to intimacy with the realities of the world that are beyond the grasp of our 5 senses, I think those calls and the learning and the training begin very early in life. I think it's a part of every human being. But for some reason, there are human beings who find that they can hear something that is being spoken, sung, and whispered to their heart. So for me, those calls and that longing and that yearning were in play, in development, in many ways throughout my life. As an adult, though, when I took up a professional life out in the world, I realized that there was a call in my spirit, and I was needing to find something. I was being called home. So the explorations took me to India. They took me to the teachings of the Far East. And after traveling very, very far off in the world, coming home, I encountered the word bard. And I had always thought that just meant Shakespeare. And when I looked it up in the dictionary, I was staggered to discover what it truly meant. And it was like a beacon fire was lit. And so from there was just a certainty, although it didn't make sense rationally, really, that I needed to have the strings of a Celtic harp under my fingers, and that the way forward would come through the melodies that came. So as the harp arrived, I had no musical training, no musical background. I was about 29 years old, and it was astonishing to me to discover all of the ancestral legacies, all of the threads in different cultures around the world where the power, the magic, the symphony, the spectacular revelations that come through song and story are a big part of the legacy of simply being a human being. And so it was those early explorations that opened the door. And when I discovered the Celtic threads linked to the harp, the bardic traditions, I knew that I had come home, and that simply, it set the true north for the years to follow.
That's amazing. You know, it's like I can really tell, well, with myself and others. I'm a drum builder, and I, of course, play drums shamanically and work with it and do healing with the drum and all that stuff. I always wanted to learn to play a musical instrument, but was never allowed to do so. But when I'm around someone that's playing guitar or harp or piano, and the music's flowing from their heart just spontaneously, it changes the entire environment. And that's so different than someone just reading sheet music and doing it. Or they can be reading sheet music and doing it if it goes through the heart. Can you speak of music from the heart?
I love the way that in the threads of story that come from the Celtic lands, there's a very short, very beautiful story that speaks of how music came into the world. And it was the Dagda, and his wife was giving birth, and there was nothing he could do. She was well tended, and he was caught up in anxiety. He was just so worried for her. And so he looks around, and he sees the wood of an apple tree. He sees the strings of horsehair, and out of nowhere, he gets the inspiration to put them together. And so he creates the first harp. And when he sits to the strings, his only longing is to simply bring a little bit of joy to his wife, who is struggling with this physical experience. And so he sets his fingers to the strings, and suddenly, for the first time in the world, the sound of joy comes into the world, and it's called Gain Tred. It's the joy strain of music. And so he plays, and suddenly his wife gives birth, and there's elation and celebration, but oh no, she's not finished yet. She's going to have a second baby at the same time. This is grand news. But now he is truly, he's grieving for the pain that she's going through. And so he again sets his fingers to the string, and he plays his heart out. He plays his sorrow, his lament. And this is the first time the music of sorrow and loss and grief come into the world. And this is the gold thread, the sorrow strand. So he plays, and it brings release, and a second child is born. Now, of course, they're all relieved. He's mopping his brow, but what do you know? She is having triplets. And so as she is getting ready to bring the third child into the world, he can see how exhausted she is. So for a third time, he sets his fingers to the strings, and he plays a sound that brings sweet rest, a rest of the heart, a rest of the soul into the world. And this is called the swan thread, the restful strain. And in this way, he brings this peace to his wife. The third child is born. But more than this, he's brought music to the world. Whenever I hear someone playing from that soulful place, they bring these experiences into the physical world, and we're able to feel joy that perhaps we were unaware of a moment before. We are able to feel the sorrow, the rest, the things that we need. The word that they used was these were endowed by music. They were actually conferred upon people. So it wasn't something that you could sink into in the background. It became something that enveloped you. And so I really understand that place you're speaking of being able to tell when someone is in that place and something is flowing through them that goes beyond sight reading and muscle memory.
Got it. So music and rhythm is used to enter the shamanic journey trance, just cross cultures. Can you explain how that works?
Well, sound and sonic rhythm, they bring the way that the brain works back to its primal place. And human beings were meant to operate from that primal place, the place of root, the place of bone, the place of certainty, the place of fire. We are elemental beings. And so I've read many brilliant explanations of how it happens with brain waves and how it brings us down below what the logical, rational mind is sorting through in all its complexity. What I love about all of these different explanations is that it simply allows us to come back to that primal place of strength that all of us have. It's like a hearth fire that's burning in our core all the time. And so whether that is the sonic driving of the drum beat, whether that is what happens to us when we get up and dance, whether it is what happens when we make sound on the voice, it can be simply a repetitive physical movement or the sound of the waves on the shore. These things bring us to that powerful, potent, in-between place. And everything that matters comes from and returns to that in-between place. So it's a very, very strong, it's a grounded place of strength and possibility.
You know, that's so Celtic, isn't it? That betwixt and between. A lot of your practice, your shamanic practices, are very linear and, compartmentalized. This is upper world, this is lower world, this is middle world. And I understand that to go and, once you're starting to get into the practices, that's a good way to start because that's where we're coming from. But what I love about the Celtic tradition is it is so seamless, and it does use the betwixt and between the shore and the ocean, between the horizon and the land, to enter into that state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And so that, to me, that gives you access to it without all you have to do is slide in. Once you get that down, all you have to do is just slide in between the elements, no matter where you are or what you're doing, and you have access to alternate space. Is that your experience?
Absolutely it is. I was amazed as an adult beginner. I had many years of a very strong meditation practice. But when I encountered the formal shamanic space, I was amazed at how natural it was. And so it is very much a natural way of functioning for us as human beings. It's the dreaming space. It is the space between heartbeats. It is the reminder that any rhythm in the world is not made by the sound on the drum. It's the space between the beats. And anyone can get there.
Yeah, it's amazing. Where'd you get your shamanic training, Jeff?
It began with a couple of books. It actually came out of a friend of mine when I was in a time of transition before the Celtic harp arrived. A friend of mine asked if I had ever heard of Joseph Campbell and his phrase, "follow your bliss," and I hadn't. And so I began to look into his writings, and he was the first formal encounter. I always thought a shaman, because I had no exposure to it, was something that was simply a property of a certain culture in North America, so it didn't speak to me because I was not of that culture. But when I read Joseph Campbell's ways of speaking of the power of story, of the shamanic place, of the roots of humanity and shamanic culture, it began a series of explorations. So from there it was a few different books, but I was immediately drawn to the Celtic. And when I had that sense of confirmation on reading the work of John and Caitlin Matthews or different writers on all of that, I went to my first shamanic workshop. So a friend of a friend, you know how it works. And again, it was that place of this is so right. It was so hard to put it into words, but it began with very much a core shamanic experience. This is how you journey. This is where you go. These are sort of the safety rules of it. And it was beautiful to have those first lifelines that reassured me that I wasn't just making it up, that I wasn't slipping into something that would get me institutionalized, but that it was natural, that it was good, that it was real.
All right. We're going to have to take a quick commercial break here. Jeff and I will return to our discussion after this short break. We're coming to you through the land of leading-edge paranormal broadcasting, the X-Zone Broadcast Network. Don't miss the other fine shows and hosts on xzbn.net. You're listening to The Science of Magic, thescienceofmagic.net. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. We will be back, so don't you go away. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Celtic shamanic teacher, Celtic harpist and singer and storyteller, Jeff Stockton. Jeff, we were just talking about how you were inspired by Joseph Campbell. Wasn't he a mythologist?
He was a mythologist, a storyteller. He was a professor of human development experience, but really looking at the idea that stories and storytelling and narrative were at their very heart shared in so many ways. The root, the seed of them, the familiar stories were told by so many cultures in their earliest expressions on the planet.
Okay, but he wasn't a shaman?
No, he wasn't.
Oh, okay. So where'd you get your Celtic training, dear?
The Celtic training came primarily from the spirits. In beginning to understand that core shamanism is, it can be a beautiful thing on its own. It allows people to find their shamanic roots in their life as they live it. But I was really intrigued by the fact that every culture had those shamanic roots in some way. And so when I began to encounter the ancestral thread, the fact that the ancestors from those of long ago were dreaming towards this moment, and the idea that we have our destiny, our song, it's actually sung into our bones and our bloodline. I began to feel the pull to really look at some of my own roots and my own ancestry. And so the majority of my own experiences came from exploring general writings on Celtic tradition, shamanic, but really looking at Celtic stories and the Celtic legacies, simply because there are some threads and roots in my own bloodline that go to those lands. So I think it was very much a part of my shamanic experience. There was no formal program or certification in that kind of training, but it is definitely at the heart of everything that I do.
Would you explain to me how we learn a tradition like this from the spirits? Isn't that what you said?
Mm. I think that our allies and our helping spirits are always singing to us, and they're simply highlighting the places that we return to. And so there, in my own shamanic journey experiences over the last 20 years, there is a thread where I am constantly being asked to pay attention to what is, to pay attention to what's calling to me. And I think that when any of us are doing this, we begin to see the number of threads woven into our lives that are speaking and singing of the same thing. So I think it is very much also a matter of the experiences in everyday life that are setting our mind on fire, that are setting a beacon fire in our heart and our spirit. Those are the things also that our wise and strong allies in the spirit realms are anchoring to. It's a combination of good advice and the brilliant fires of life. And I think when we dance between the two of them, and there's a nudging that says, you need to do more of this, or you need to look for something that is going to nourish this more, or you need to knock on a door out in the world and see if there's a place for this out in the world. I think there's a beautiful conspiracy. I know conspiracy is not a word that is often used in a positive way, but I think life and stories and songs and the ancestors and the spirits, I think they do conspire to help us get to the places where we have realization. So for me, that's the way that unfolds.
So I understand you teach shamanism, and this sounds a little nebulous from the way our minds usually work. How do you put people in a position to access what you just talked about?
I love the way that no matter what shamanic culture or tradition we're talking about, at the heart of it, in the bones of it, there are the same essential anchors. So there is bounty, beauty, wisdom, and power in the north, and in the east, and the south, and the west. And those directions, just at its simplest, they cross. There's a line that goes from the north to the south, from the east to the west. And there is a meeting place between all of the power, the beauty, the wonder of every direction. Between the stars above and the deep earth below us, there's a meeting place. And so for me, when I'm working with people in helping them to begin to understand shamanic experience and how to work with that space, it is all about starting from here and now. And in so many ceremonies, in so many gatherings, one of the first things that people do is step into and invite people to recognize, remember, and stand strong in this circle that we are in together. And that circle has at its center where we are, where our hearts are beating. And from there we look out and greet the north and the south and the stars above and the deep earth below. And it's in this place, in the heart of the circle, that all of us gather. And from there, I think even the simple power of the circle is an essential part of beginning to explore what shamanism really means. And
so coming into the moment and finding the center of your world in the moment is the springboard that you're talking about here?
Yes.
I got it. Jeff, you said your music is award-winning, yes?
It was a storytelling recording.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Which award did you get for that?
It was one of the World Storytelling Awards. So it's an annual thing that is based in the States, and every year they select a certain number of recordings and books that highlight the strengths of storytelling from artists internationally.
Got it. Very nice. Nice coup there, boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if music can be used to raise our frequency and create attunement, can it also be used to lower frequency and create dissonance?
Absolutely it can. When we think about the places that music invites us, just in turning on the radio, there are certain pieces of music that we gravitate to when we need to unwind, when we want to have a wild party, when we are angry, disheartened, and dispirited. I think it's always affecting us and in dialogue with the parts of our heart and soul that are in motion.
Got it. How do you think music can set sacred space?
I think that what music does when it is working from that sacred place is it reminds us that sacred space is very much simply a matter of mindset. It is, in reality, a fact that we're always in sacred space. To be sacred comes from the roots of the word whole, and it is simply a place of wholeness. So if I can remember this, and we as human beings are so forgetful and get so distracted by so many things, but I am sacred. This place is sacred. What I do, what I think, what I say, it is a sacred act, and it has repercussions. I think that sound brings us into that place, whether it's a monotone or a melody, whether it's a grunt or a profound word. Sound reminds us that this moment is the place, the only place. It is a sacred place.
Got it. So the music brings you present, and present is sacred. Is that what you're saying?
It is.
Yeah, yeah. One thing that I've noticed I'm a songwriter, is that some of my words, my songs end up being precognizant or prophetic. Often it's not till years later I realize, oh, that's what the song was about. Have you experienced that? And if so, how does that work? Why?
For me, when I work with song and the melodies come, the first thing that happens for me is that there's a recognition that I need to sing that song. That song is what I need right now, that melody line. And I've learned not to work too hard at turning it into a song. So for me, it's actually simply the melody line, and those are gifts from the spirits, from the ancestors, from the trees, from the stones, from the waters. And so those bring me to the place that I need to be. And when they come together for me, sometimes songs take years to complete themselves, where there's a melody line that I have traveled with and worked with, and then all of a sudden the words fall into it, and it has direction that it's called to out into the world. So I do understand that place of not realizing until years later what it all meant. But I think for me, every song is a spirit. Every story is alive. And so those things, those songs, those stories, as beings of expressiveness, they come into clarity and into their moment in their own time, in their own way. And a lot of times when it finally gets polished up for a recording or a performance, it's almost a cleaning up and a getting gussied up to walk out the door. I think they travel with us until they're ready to be launched into the world.
There's something that I've wrestled with as a recording artist myself, and that's blending the channeled work with the oral tradition in modern-day recording practices. Could you speak to this? We have just a couple minutes more.
There's something so raw about sound when we make it, when the rhythm hits us, and to take that raw, vital energy and then to have it become a sound loop that is going to go out into the world, I think that's a perilous process, because we hear so much music, our ears are attuned to every perceived flaw, every pitch waver, every rhythm that is out of step when we hear it in a repeated loop. So for me, it's always that process and that struggle of not trying to tidy it up too much, not trying to make it into something that's perfect, because our rational mind defines perfect very differently than our hearts do. So in live performance, all of those things are very forgivable. In a recorded work, I find that I have to back off and not try and fix things that actually don't need to be fixed.
The point here for me, and we'll probably have to pick up with this on the other side of the break, but the point here for me is when we're performing live, when we're performing shamanically for our people in the moment, doing healing work, doing journey work, our voice can be aligned with everything that's going on in the moment, where the stars are, where the planets are, what's going on with the earth, what season it is. But if it's recorded, all of a sudden that's frozen. And that's what I'd like to pick up with on the other side of this break, and let's see where we get with it. Jeff and I will be back shortly. You're listening to The Science of Magic, thescienceofmagic.net, the place where altruistic professionals of science and the esoteric create common ground for the betterment of our world. We're brought to you by the leader in paranormal, spirituality, and alternative health programming, the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. We will be back. Though the world seems in turmoil around us, let's not lose our way. The stars still shine down, blessing us with their light. The sun rises every morning, chasing away the cold and darkness. There are good people of service in this world. We have much to be grateful for as we're wrapped in the arms of all of God's creation. This is Gwilda Wiyaka, host of the Science of Magic Radio, wishing you and yours a very Merry Christmas. I hope your holiday is filled with comfort and joy as you're surrounded by those you love. I'd like to thank all of you for being our loyal listeners on the X Zone Broadcast Network and for joining us on this grand adventure called life. As the New Year's dawns, let us all stand in truth as we embrace peace. Welcome back. This is the Science of Magic, bringing together gifted people of service to the world. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Celtic shamanic teacher, Celtic harpist, singer, and storyteller, Jeff Stockton. Jeff, we were just talking about the modern-day dilemma of honoring the oral tradition for all the reasons that we might speak of, oral being in the moment and attuned with what's going on right now in the center of that circle, and being able to record and put it out in the world. What else do you have to say about that?
Well, we were thinking about you had brought up the idea of the context. You know, in a live performance, in a shamanic ceremony, in a healing ceremony, it is everything about that moment in time, who's there, how the energies are flowing in the room, what people have brought with them, what people are letting go of in the space. And in those spaces, the performance itself, it's like an atmosphere. And the word atma, it means soul. So it's a circle of soul. And so to take that atmosphere, that circle of soul, and then to hear it later in a context where it's not that same once-in-eternity combination of people, place, temperature, wind, whatever is happening all around us, and in that place, out in the universe, I think it can be, it means something totally different. So it can be a challenge to work with the recorded space. And when I'm working with a podcast, when I'm working with a song, I am always trying to think about what's happening for me right there at the mic, but also really trying to think about it having a place in the world that isn't necessarily tied to my immediate here and now. And that is an interesting place to go creatively.
So it's a trans-temporal kind of place within the sacredness of the moment?
Yeah, it's almost asking, how do you find that timeless space? I think the best recordings, they've opened the door to something timeless. It's not just about November 11th, 2016. It's about every moment. It's about every person, every place. And that is almost an experience of alchemy. It's that impossible something that's been brought in, and it's an incredible gift.
Got it. So let's talk about stories. I love stories. Why do you think they're so important in shamanism?
Human beings, it's what we need. A shark swims, a bear has claws, a bee flies, creates honey. Human beings, it is the narrative, it is our lifeline, it is our unique gift in the world, in the universe, and we need it in the same way that our bodies need oxygen. So when I look at the power of story, we're always living our own story, creating our own narrative. There is no such thing as objective reality. I know cameras record it. I know we can have an audio loop of something, a photo of something. But for each human being, we are constantly in a process of creating and expressing meaning. And the way in which we do that is through story. It's through the beginning, the middle, and the end. It is through the spin we put on things. It's the cloak of villainy or heroism we put on an event, a person, a word, a moment in time. We are constantly creating narrative. And I think one of the challenges for us is to understand that it's also a shared narrative, and it's not just that personal narrative.
Mm-hmm. You know, there's ancient stories, as you know, that have been passed down for generations, and then there's the ones that tend to come through shamanic trance work in the moment. Can you speak to the difference between them and the application of each?
The stories that come through the ages, those are amazing things. I think about what does it take for a story to be told literally for thousands of years. Human beings physically as a species, we don't change that much. Our claws haven't gotten significantly sharper. Our fangs haven't gotten significantly sharper. Our biceps, etc., over the millennia we've been here. But our culture and our expression of what it means to be a human being in a place and time has changed so dramatically. So I think about those few stories that have that timeless quality we talked about earlier with music, and they can still speak to someone who is a digital native, someone who Skypes and is got the thumb muscles going on their phone. Those are profound things. Shamanic experiences take us back to that same primal element. It's the here and now. I always think when I'm telling a story, it is not a performance. It's not pushing a play button. It's not a recital. It is the creation, the recreation of it happening right here and now. And so a shamanic journey is that same thing, because the shamanic journey space is happening right now when we're in it. It's not a daydream. It's not a visualization. Our whole body is in that experience, whether it's bright and sunny or whether it's dark and dreary and heavy. And so I think the shamanic stories have that same primal core that all of the human spirit responds to in those same stories that have been told by countless storytellers.
There's a lot of allegory and metaphor that needs to be translated for the story to make sense in shamanic journeys. And also, shamanic journeys can be, trans-temporal. It can be things that happened in the past that we're healing, or it can be things that could possibly happen in the future if we don't change direction. So how do you work with that? How do you work with the allegory? How do you tell what's what?
I think it is very much a process of paying attention. So it is more a matter of look at this right now, really clearly see and feel what's going on. So the allegory, it creates a state of paradox in our minds where the rational mind, we can rationalize absolutely anything as human beings. The very best course of action and the most atrocious course of action. Human beings, we have a knack to rationalize. And the allegory, as you name it, it's that indefinable. It could be of long ago. It could be what's coming down the pipe for the future. It could be about this moment in time. That undefinable bit, I think it pulls us out of the negative loops of rationalize, explain, and justify everything that we're doing so that we have constant permission. I think the shamanic stories, they're constantly challenging that sense of permission and entitlement that we as human beings can get stuck in.
Get totally locked up in it, can't we? Why do you think all shamanic traditions have used stories and storytelling to teach?
Because when a story is told, for me, it is our story, our experience right here and now. It's happening in the room. It's not words. When I think about language, it's just hoots and clicks. It's just sound that we make, and we put all of the meaning on it. And there's this magic that happens when a story is told, and somehow it is the creating of this circle that holds us, where all of us are having that same experience at the same time, no matter how different we are. And so I think story has a power unlike anything else to bring us back into community. We are here together. It is our experience. It is our future, our dream at this moment. And I think in our modern age, we are really hungry for this.
Yes, and we are, and yet that's our educational system now is totally lacking in that, and I think we're paying the price.
I think we absolutely are, and what I'm heartened by is the fact that people are recognizing this, and they're trying to find ways to actually come together and be together, whether that's virtual or looking for the ways to make it less superficial and more binding, more powerful. I think relationships and community, they almost become vows in a certain way, where we commit long-term to something. And we need to remember that too as a species.
Yeah, being able to really stand in the truth of our ancient stories and create our new ones is how we create our reality, isn't it?
It absolutely is. We are constantly telling that story, and when we speak something, that word is in motion for all time. It is constantly in motion through the world. When we reach out to another, it's a physical act, and it has echoes that last for a long time. It's not just for this one moment in time that's forgotten. So it ups the ante a little bit, and it asks us to wake up just a smidge.
Yes, my original teacher was a Lakota elder, and he said that every word you utter goes to the seventh generation and beyond, and therefore you must be very mindful of what you say, when you say it, how you say it, and don't overuse it. I thought those were good words to live by.
Very good.
Yeah. Jeff, we're just about out of time. I want to thank you so much for being on The Science of Magic and for the good work you're doing out there. And your website is?
www.jeffstockton.ca.
Then that's in Canada, yes?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Thanks again for being on The Science of Magic.
Thank you, Gwilda. It was a true gift.
Mm. Our guest this hour has been Celtic shamanic teacher, Celtic harpist, singer, and storyteller, Jeff Stockton. Jeff's website, jeffstockton.ca. This has been The Science of Magic. Remember, you can always listen to past thought-provoking episodes on our website, thescienceofmagic.net. Don't forget to join us on the next episode of The Science of Magic. Until next time, dear ones, may you be blessed with knowledge, comforted with love, and enrich your life with story and song.